This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/stopthestigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.
If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/stopthestigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.
Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. I'm your host, guiding you through the cases that have moved through the courts and reached a conclusion, but left the public divided. These aren't your typical cut and dried cases. These are the ones where the facts may seem clear, but the truth? Well, that's another story. Now, imagine this. You are at home, you're relaxing. Maybe you're thinking about your day as it's winding down. And then out of nowhere, your own partner turns on you, shattering everything you thought you knew about them. For those who knew Katherine Knight, the signs of trouble were there, but no one could have imagined how far things would go. Here in this episode, we're going to dive into this case, a case that has left people wondering. Was she simply disturbed, or was she completely and terrifyingly in control? This is a story with chilling details, a history of violence, and a crime so brutal, it's almost hard to believe that it's real. So stick with me here, because by the end of this episode, you're going to have the chance to decide for yourself. Was Katherine Knight mad or simply bad? Katherine Knight's story is one that has haunted everyone who's come across it. This is not your average true crime tale, and it's not one for the faint of heart, so be warned there. As we dig into the details of this case, there's a question that keeps coming up, a question that haunts anyone who's followed her case. Was Katherine Knight truly insane, lost in the depths of a twisted mental state, or was she fully aware of the horrors she inflicted? Katherine Knight's story is rooted in a difficult upbringing, marked by experiences that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She was born in 1955 in the small town of Tenterfield, New South Wales. She was raised in a household where violence and dysfunction were the norm. Katherine's father was known for his abusive behavior, and her mother, though a figure of care, was caught in the cycle of trauma, creating an environment where Katherine grew up surrounded by fear and anger and emotional instability. This turbulent childhood left deep scars, and by the time she was a teenager, Katherine was already exhibiting signs of aggression and instability. Those early years set the stage for a young woman who would come to be known for her volatile temper and erratic behavior. People around her noticed Katherine's unpredictability, describing her as a ticking time bomb. Her family, her friends, and later her co-workers saw the mood swings, the rages, and the violent outbursts. Her anger was like a storm, often erupting without warning and leaving those around her on edge. By the time she entered her first serious relationships, the pattern was well established. Katherine's partners quickly learned that she could be loving one moment and then terrifyingly aggressive the next. Katherine's personal relationships were riddled with red flags. Her romantic life was a series of intense but toxic connections, where affection often turned to anger, and small disputes could escalate into frightening confrontations. Her first marriage to a man named David Kellett was marred by physical altercations. Katherine reportedly attacked him on several occasions, and their relationship was a harbinger of the disturbing pattern that would follow her into future relationships. And people close to her recognized that she seemed to be constantly on edge, her emotions just beneath the surface, waiting to explode. Despite these warning signs, Katherine moved on from relationship to relationship, each one marked by escalating violence. By the time she met John Price, a man with a reputation for being easygoing and kind-hearted, her behavior had only become more intense. Friends of John Price were wary, having heard stories of Katherine's past. Price himself noticed her possessiveness and quick temper, but at first he believed he could handle her. He was known as a resilient and grounded individual, and it seemed to those around him that if anyone could keep Katherine in check, it might be him. Soon things began to spiral. John Price confided in friends and colleagues that Katherine had started making threats. In one instance, he reportedly said that she had threatened his life. For many, it was alarming to hear that Price, a man who seemed able to take almost anything in stride, was afraid. He mentioned her violent tendencies to those around him, and his friends urged him to leave, and he tried, but Katherine wouldn't let him go so easily. Their relationship became a cycle of conflict, reconciliation, and escalating threats, and with each reconciliation seeming to lead them closer to the tragic end. On February 29th in 2000, Katherine's rage reached its horrifying climax. That night, in a premeditated attack, she stabbed John Price multiple times. But this is not where the horror ended. Katherine's actions after the murder were so gruesome that even seasoned investigators were left speechless. The details of her crime shocked not only the local community, but the entire country, and soon, news of the murder spread internationally. In the aftermath, the question of Katherine's mental state was impossible to ignore. How could a person carry out such a horrific act without being in the grip of severe mental illness? Some believed that her traumatic past had created a storm of mental health issues, driving her to commit a crime she may not have fully understood. Others argued that Katherine knew exactly what she was doing, that the crime details pointed to someone who planned each action deliberately and took pleasure in exerting control and inflicting pain. Psychologists and psychiatrists examined Katherine closely, some diagnosing her with borderline personality disorder, while others argued she might have had antisocial traits. However, opinions varied widely. To some mental health professionals, Katherine's actions reflected a complete disconnect from reality, while others argued that her ability to plan the attack and then behave calmly afterward was evidence of someone fully aware of their actions. These contradictory findings only fueled the public debate. Was Katherine a cold-blooded killer, or was she a woman whose mental state had fractured to the point of driving her to murder? As her trial unfolded, the courtroom became a battleground of contrasting views. The defense argued that Katherine was suffering from mental illness, her actions the tragic outcome of an unbalanced mind. They presented evidence of her violent tendencies and her troubled background, attempting to paint a picture of a woman shaped by trauma and dysfunction. Meanwhile, the prosecution, they focused on the meticulous nature of the crime, arguing that Katherine Knight was fully aware of the horror she inflicted and had planned it all in advance. Outside the courtroom, the public was equally divided. Some saw Katherine as a victim of her own mental struggles, a person who had been pushed beyond her limits by her history and her circumstances, while others saw her as an embodiment of pure evil, someone who took the life of an innocent man in a brutal and calculated way. Friends and family of John Price mourned his loss, devastated by the crime, while psychologists and criminal justice experts debated the implications of Katherine's case for the broader legal system. And so we're left with the question at the heart of this episode. Was Katherine Knight truly mad, driven by a mind that had spiraled beyond her control? Or was she bad, a cold and calculating killer who understood exactly what she was doing? As we explore the facts and theories surrounding her case, I invite you to consider this question for yourself. Could someone like Katherine Knight truly have been in control? Or was she merely a puppet to her own fractured psyche? As Katherine Knight's case made headlines, it stirred a heated public debate that went far beyond the courtroom. Her crime was undeniably shocking. But the real controversy was in how society interpreted her actions. Was Katherine Knight a victim of her past, a product of trauma and mental illness? Or was she a cold-blooded killer who manipulated everyone around her until her darkest desires took over? To understand why Katherine Knight's case became so notorious, let's go back to that chilling night of February 29th in 2000. So Katherine showed up at John Price's home, despite their turbulent relationship and the fact that he had tried to end things with her multiple times. Price, who had confided in his friends that he was genuinely afraid of Katherine, he had taken out a restraining order even against her. He knew she was capable of violence. He had no idea, though, how far she could go or would go. That night, after spending time together, Price went to bed, likely unaware of what Katherine had planned. In the early hours, Katherine took a large butcher knife and stabbed him repeatedly, at least 37 times, according to forensic reports. The brutality of the attack was staggering. Some of the wounds were so deep they cut through the bone. Price's attempts to fight her off were evident in the defensive wounds on his hands and his arms, but he could not escape. Katherine's assault was relentless. But the horror did not end there. After killing Price, Katherine went about a series of actions that defy any rational explanation. She meticulously staged a scene so disturbing that seasoned investigators struggled to process what they found. After taking Price's life, she continued to mutilate his body in ways that were later described as inhuman. What's more, she attempted to set up a bizarre and horrifying tableau in the home, as though she were following some twisted script. In the hours that followed, Katherine even prepared a meal with parts of Price's remains, setting plates at the dinner table with a grotesque sense of ritual. She arranged the plates as if she were planning to serve a meal to Price's children, who fortunately were not present in the house that night. This part of the crime left people grappling with disbelief and horror, as it suggested a level of detachment and depravity that felt almost unimaginable. After completing this grim setup, Katherine cleaned herself up and went to bed, as if nothing had ever happened. She was found by police the next day, lying calmly in Price's home. When questioned, she provided no logical explanation for her actions and displayed a chilling lack of remorse. It was as though she had compartmentalized the entire event, disconnecting herself from the brutality of what she had done. The scene left police with more questions than answers, as you can imagine. Was Katherine Knight in a state of psychosis? Was she detached from reality? Or was this the work of someone fully aware of her actions, someone who chose to inflict horror on another human being and then rationalized it in a way that allowed her to move forward without any guilt. Her behavior after the crime, organizing, arranging, calmly sleeping in the same house as her victim, was so bizarre that it intensified the debate over her mental state. These disturbing details fueled the public debate, splitting people into two different camps. Those who viewed Katherine as mentally unstable argued that her actions were indicative of someone lost in a delusional, disturbed mind. They pointed to the excessive violence, the ritualistic aspects, and her apparent detachment as evidence of severe mental illness. To them, this wasn't simply murder, it was the tragic outcome of a person who had spiraled into the depths of psychosis. But others argued that these same details pointed to something even darker. A person who was completely aware of what she was doing and took pleasure in creating horror. They argued that Katherine's actions after the murder showed a methodical, calculated mind rather than one overtaken by mental illness. The controversy surrounding Katherine Knight, it extends beyond her horrific actions, though. It also touches on broader societal issues regarding how we understand domestic violence and the challenges of mental health. Katherine's history paints a picture of a woman who experienced significant trauma throughout her life. From a young age, she was exposed to violence and abuse, leading many to argue that her past should be considered when evaluating her actions. This perspective prompts a critical examination of the societal failures that may have contributed to her violent behavior. Public opinion surrounding Katherine Knight has been sharply divided. Many do view her as a monstrous figure, a woman who acted out of rage and jealousy, embodying the stereotype of the female killer who betrays her domestic role. While others argue that Katherine's history of trauma and mental health struggles should inform our understanding of her actions. And this division raises questions about how we all, society, views women who commit violent acts, particularly those with histories of victimization. This is a very complex case. Now, as the trial unfolded, the prosecution sought to emphasize the brutality of the crime and Katherine's apparent lack of remorse. These are big things. They portrayed her as cold, a cold, calculated individual who carefully planned this murder and subsequently staged the scene in order to manipulate those who would discover it. The defense, on the other hand, aimed to highlight Katherine's troubled background, arguing that her actions were influenced by years of abuse and psychological distress. This juxtaposition of narratives adds layers to the discussion about accountability and the factors that contribute to violent behavior. The media also played a significant role in shaping public perceptions of Katherine Knight. Coverage of the trial was intense and often sensationalized, focusing on the grotesque details of the crime, because they can, and people want to hear about it, and therefore people watch the news. But this relentless focus may have contributed to the perception of Katherine as a monster, overshadowing the nuances of her life story that are also important. The portrayal of women who commit violence often skews towards sensationalism in general, reducing complex human experiences to simplistic narratives that don't really reflect the realities of their lives. And therefore, the public on the other end of the media is just not getting correct information that they can intelligently use to make their decisions, yet we're all out there making our decisions anyway, because we are humans and this is what we do. We see an issue and we make a decision. We take a stance. We have opinions. We have ideas about it. Now, in the wake of the trial, Katherine Knight was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And this outcome, just the outcome itself, this sparked further discussions about justice and the efficacy of the legal system in addressing cases of domestic violence. Many advocates for victims of domestic abuse view Katherine's case as a critical opportunity to discuss the need for better support systems for those in violent relationships and the importance of recognizing the signs of abuse before it escalates to tragic outcomes. The controversy surrounding Katherine Knight raises essential questions about how we understand violence, particularly in the context of intimate relationships. How do we balance the narratives of victimhood and perpetration? Is it even possible to hold individuals accountable for their actions while also recognizing these complex factors that may have contributed to their behavior? These questions are not easily answered and reflect broader societal challenges in addressing the dynamics of domestic violence and mental health. Okay, let's now examine the arguments. Let's look at the trial of Katherine Knight. This was a dramatic confrontation of two conflicting narratives that sought to explain the motivations behind this completely horrific crime. Now, as the prosecution and defense laid out their arguments, the courtroom became a stage for a deeply emotional and challenging exploration of love and betrayal and ultimately violence. The prosecution's case against Katherine Knight was built on the assertion that she acted with premeditation and malicious intent when she murdered John Price. And they painted a picture of a woman who had a long history of violent relationships and who had become a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. The prosecution argued that Katherine's actions were not those of a troubled individual, but rather those of a calculating murderer who planned the crime with chilling efficiency. One of the critical pieces of evidence presented by the prosecution was the brutality of the murder itself, emphasizing the gruesome details about how Katherine had not only killed John, but then mutilated his body. Brought the kids into it in her mind, trying to set things up for them when they came home. The nature of the crime was particularly heinous. The prosecution argued that Katherine's actions demonstrated a level of rage and premeditation that indicated she was fully aware of the gravity of her actions. Prosecution's narrative suggested this was not a crime of passion. This was a calculated act of violence, stemming from deep-seated anger and resentment. The prosecution focused on Katherine's tumultuous history of relationships. They portrayed her as a woman with a violent past. They introduced evidence of previous assaults on other partners, using this history to establish a pattern of behavior that culminated in John Price's murder. They argued that her violent tendencies were well documented and that she posed a significant threat to anyone in a relationship with her. And this narrative sought to frame Katherine as a predator, someone who could not control her impulses and who ultimately chose to resort to extreme violence when faced with conflict. And then, in stark contrast, the defense team for Katherine Knight sought to paint a more complex picture of her life and her actions. They argued that her behavior was the result of years of trauma and abuse, which had a profound impact on her mental health. The defense aimed to convey that Katherine was not simply a cold-blooded murderer, but a woman struggling with psychological issues that were exacerbated by her tumultuous relationships. One of the key arguments made by the defense was that Katherine's violent behavior stemmed from a history of abuse and trauma. They highlighted her experiences growing up in a violent household where she was exposed to physical and emotional abuse. And the defense argued that these experiences shaped her actions and contributed to her mental health struggles. This perspective sought to humanize Katherine, encouraging the jury to view her through the lens of a victim rather than a villain. And the defense also focused on Katherine's mental health issues, arguing she was suffering from severe psychological distress at the time of the murder. And they presented evidence from mental health professionals who testified that Katherine exhibited signs of a personality disorder and severe emotional instability. This aspect of the defense aimed to establish that Katherine was not in a sound state of mind when she committed the crime, which could influence the jury's understanding of her culpability. In addition to challenging the prosecution's narrative, the defense sought to highlight inconsistencies in the evidence presented. They argued that the prosecution relied heavily on the sensationalized details and emotional appeals rather than concrete evidence linking Katherine to premeditated murder. The defense contended that the brutality of the crime should not overshadow the complexities of Katherine's motivations and her mental health struggles. They also attempted to raise questions about the reliability of witness testimonies, emphasizing that many of the individuals who provided accounts of Katherine's behavior, that they were biased or had their own agendas. They sought to cast doubt on the prosecution's claims by highlighting the inconsistencies in testimonies and questioning the motives behind the narratives being presented. And then, of course, we have the media and public perception. Throughout this trial, the influence of media coverage was evident in how both the prosecution and defense framed their arguments. The sensational nature of the crime drew significant media attention. And this is the good stuff, right? They'll get a lot of hours of viewing on this story. And the news often focused on the most shocking details and perpetuated certain narratives about Katherine Knight. The media's portrayal of Katherine as a female monster shaped public perception and created a charged atmosphere that likely influenced the jury's views. If she's a monster, we must convict. The prosecution was aware of the media's role in shaping this narrative and sought to leverage it. Conversely, the defense faced the challenge of countering it, this narrative that had already taken hold in the public consciousness. Because if you watch these high-profile cases, it's who gets to you first, guys. That's how they can help change our public perception. And once we decide that someone is mad or bad, it's hard for us to change our minds because now it's become our stance. We own it. The defense had to fight all of this. They worked to emphasize Katherine's background, her struggles, and the factors that led to her violent actions, seeking to humanize her in the eyes of the jury. Their strategy involved presenting Katherine as a flawed individual who was shaped by her experiences, rather than as a monster who willingly committed a heinous act. And like so many of these cases that we go through, the impact of public opinion in this trial, it can't be underestimated. As the trial progressed, discussions around Katherine Knight became a hot topic. Varying opinions emerged across social media and news outlets. This public discourse highlighted the challenges of securing a fair trial in a highly publicized case, where jurors might be influenced by the opinions of the masses rather than the evidence presented in court. This is a huge problem out there in the world, guys. It just is. For Katherine Knight, the jury's decision was influenced not only by the evidence, but also by the broader societal narratives that surrounded the case. And as we conclude this examination of the arguments surrounding the Katherine Knight case, it's essential to consider how these discussions shape our understanding of violence and mental health and the justice system. This case is a powerful reminder of the importance of examining the factors that contribute to violent behavior and the need for comprehensive support systems for individuals affected by domestic violence. It does not mean that violence is okay if you have a troubled background, but how do we know where to put someone if we can't understand why they did something so heinous? Are we helping ourselves in society by just locking up people like this and not looking into it further? Because there will be more people, there will be more mental health issues. And it seems as we go through these cases, understanding psychology in all of this is particularly helpful, because how the public is reacting, how the prosecution and the defense argue their cases, Psychology comes into play often. All right, well, as we draw close to this case, it's time for me to invite you to reflect on the evidence and the arguments and the narratives. I mean, this case is not just a chilling account of a brutal crime, because it was, but it also raises questions about justice and mental health. And we see this happen in cases like this, and we're always asking the question, where are the answers? At the heart of the discussion is the pivotal question: was Katherine Knight a victim of her circumstances, or was she a cold-blooded murderer who planned and executed a horrific crime? The answer is complex, and it demands careful consideration of all the evidence and the societal context around her actions. Law is a funny thing, sometimes seems so cut and dried, even here, mad or bad, right? But every case is different. As we go through these cases, is it even possible to apply one psychological rule, if you will, across all cases? Doesn't quite seem like that'll work, and maybe that's part of this problem. The legal system is designed to uphold the principle of innocent until proven guilty. Yet, in high-profile cases like this, public opinion can shift dramatically. The media narrative, societal expectations, emotional responses, someone's background, it all contributes to how we perceive guilt and innocence. This case is particularly disturbing, making it even more difficult to try to make a choice on guilt or innocence. See if you can commit to a side, guilty or innocent. What do you think about the jury? They must have had a very difficult time trying to figure this out. If someone is ill, you don't want to punish them, but you're conflicted because the crime is so heinous, they must be put away. It's a tough one. Thank you for joining me in this Katherine Knight case. Another case in true crime, the court of public opinion. Stay safe out there, guys. Stay curious, ask the questions. And until next time, this is Alexis Knight.